On a cold November night in 2018, a tragic and heart-wrenching event unfolded in Polk County, Florida. Loretta Picker.
911, what is the address of your emergency?
I think my house is on fire, and I'm here alone, and I'm on a walker.
They're there with you, okay? So, do you know if your door is unlocked? So I can let them know.
Yes, it's unlocked. Tell them to hurry.
A 76-year-old woman recovering from hip surgery found herself trapped in her home as it was engulfed in flames. Loretta's physical condition left her unable to move, and she was confined to her couch. Her husband was away with the grandchildren, leaving her alone to face the terrifying ordeal. As the fire grew more intense, Loretta did the only thing she could. She called 911. The call began with Loretta's trembling voice, filled with fear and desperation. "Please help me," she cried. "My house is on fire, and I'm here alone." The dispatcher tried to reassure her, saying that help was on the way, but the minutes ticked by, and no one arrived. The fire department had been dispatched, but there was a severe lack of urgency in their response. Loretta's house was located in a rural area, far from the nearest fire hydrant. Despite this, the fire captain, James Williams, made the shocking decision to direct the water supply towards a nearby forest fire instead of the house where Loretta was trapped. The chilling reality was that Loretta was left to fend for herself. Throughout the 911 call, Loretta's fear became palpable. She could hear the sirens approaching and desperately hoped that rescue was imminent. "They know I'm in here, right?" she asked the dispatcher, her voice cracking with anxiety. "Yes, they know you're in there," the dispatcher replied. "I'm going to stay on the line until they get in there with you." As the fire raged on, Loretta's hope began to wane. She repeatedly asked how long it would take for the firefighters to reach her. The dispatcher, trying to maintain composure, assured her that they were on their way. But Loretta's pleas grew more frantic as the flames and smoke closed in. "Please hurry," she begged. "I can't breathe." Minutes turned into an agonizing eternity. The fire department's log later revealed that they had arrived on the scene but did not attempt to enter the house due to the intensity of the fire. They remained outside, watching as the house was consumed by flames. Captain Williams, shockingly, took out his phone and recorded the fire for Snapchat, a move that would later be condemned by the public and Loretta's grieving family. Inside the house, Loretta's situation grew more dire. The smoke filled her lungs, and she struggled to stay conscious. "Oh, dear God," she whispered. "Please help me." The dispatcher, hearing the desperation in her voice, tried to keep her calm. "Stay down and cover your face," she advised. "They'll be there any minute." But the minutes dragged on, and no rescue came. Loretta's breathing became labored, and her voice grew weaker. The dispatcher, helpless on the other end of the line, could only offer words of comfort. "I'm here with you," she said softly. "Just hold on." As the fire intensified, the heat became unbearable. Loretta's final moments were filled with unimaginable pain and fear. The call captured her last, heart-wrenching cries for help. "I don't want to die," she sobbed. "Please, someone save me." But no one came. Loretta Picker perished in the fire, just feet away from the door that firefighters never entered. Her death was a result of a series of tragic failures, from the lack of urgency in the emergency response to the callous actions of Captain Williams. The aftermath of Loretta's death was marked by grief and outrage. Her family was devastated, struggling to understand how such a preventable tragedy could have occurred. They sued the fire department and received a settlement, but no amount of money could bring back their beloved Loretta. The community was equally outraged. The release of the 911 call and the revelation of Captain Williams' actions led to widespread condemnation. The fire department faced intense scrutiny, and changes were demanded to ensure that such a tragedy would never happen again. Loretta Picker's story is a haunting reminder of the importance of compassion and urgency in emergency situations. Her final moments, captured in that distressing 911 call, serve as a powerful testament to the human cost of negligence and the critical need for improved emergency response protocols. In the early 1980s, the residents of Minnesota were terrorized by a series of brutal attacks and murders. The man behind these heinous crimes was Paul Michael Stephanie, who would later become infamously known as the Weepy-voiced killer. What made Stephanie's crimes even more chilling were the phone calls he made to the police after each attack.
Fire emergency.
Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one over at St. Paul. I don't know what's the matter with me. I'm sick.
Where he would cry and plead for forgiveness in a high-pitched, weeping voice. These calls, filled with guilt and remorse, stood in stark contrast to the horrific violence he inflicted on his victims. Paul Michael Stephanie's descent into murder began on New Year's Eve in 1980. His first known victim was Karen Potak, a young woman who was brutally beaten with a tire iron. Stephanie left her for dead near the Malberg Manufacturing Company in St. Paul. Miraculously, Karen survived the attack, but she was left with severe injuries and trauma. Shortly after the assault, Stephanie made his first Weepy call to the police. His voice, quivering with emotion, confessed to the crime. "God damn, will you find me? I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody." The following year, on June 3, 1981, Stephanie struck again. This time, his victim was Kimberly Compton, an 18-year-old girl who had just arrived in St. Paul from Wisconsin. Stephanie lured her to a secluded area and attacked her with an ice pick, stabbing her 61 times. After the brutal murder, he called the police once more, his voice filled with regret and anguish. "Goddamn, will you find me? I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody," he sobbed. Stephanie's remorseful calls became his chilling trademark. Each time he attacked, he would reach out to the authorities, seemingly unable to reconcile his violent actions with his own guilt. These calls, while deeply disturbing, also played a crucial role in linking the crimes and eventually identifying the killer. On August 5, 1982, Stephanie targeted Barbara Simons, a 40-year-old nurse. He met her at a bar and offered her a ride home. Instead of taking her home, he drove to a remote location and attacked her with an ice pick, stabbing her more than 100 times. After leaving her body near the Mississippi River, Stephanie made another tearful call to the police. "Please don't talk. Just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one over in St. Paul," he cried. Despite the brutality of his crimes, Stephanie's calls continued to reflect a twisted sense of remorse. It was as if he was compelled to confess his guilt, yet he was powerless to stop his violent urges. The police, now familiar with his voice, were closing in on him, but they needed more evidence to capture the elusive killer. On August 21, 1982, Stephanie's murderous spree came to an end. He picked up Denise Williams, a 19-year-old woman, and attempted to kill her with a screwdriver. However, Denise fought back fiercely, managing to escape and flag down a passing car for help. She survived the attack and was able to provide the police with a detailed description of her attacker. The breakthrough came when Stephanie made another Weepy call to the police, confessing to the attack on Denise Williams. This time, the authorities were ready. Using the information provided by Denise and the recordings of Stephanie's voice, they tracked him down and arrested him. During the trial, the Weepy voice recordings were played, leaving the jury and the public horrified by the stark contrast between his sobbing confessions and the brutal nature of his crimes. Stephanie was convicted of multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the attacks on Karen Potak, Kimberly Compton, and Denise Williams. Later, he confessed to the murder of Barbara Simons, adding another layer of closure for the victims' families. In prison, Stephanie's health began to deteriorate. In 1997, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. As his condition worsened, he sought to clear his conscience and confess to all his crimes, including several unsolved cases that had puzzled investigators for years. His final days were spent in reflection, but no amount of remorse could undo the pain and suffering he had caused. The story of Paul Michael Stephanie, the Weepy-voiced killer, remains one of the most disturbing and perplexing cases in criminal history. His tearful calls, filled with regret and sorrow, starkly contrasted with the horrific violence he inflicted on his victims. These recordings serve as a haunting reminder of the complex and often unfathomable nature of human behavior, leaving an indelible mark on the annals of true crime. And moving forward, many few of you guys did the subscribe, so make sure to click on the subscribe button for more of these kinds of videos, or if not, then maybe you will face similar these. On April 20th, 1999, an ordinary school day at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, turned into a nightmare that would forever scar the nation. Two students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, armed with guns and homemade bombs, launched a brutal attack on their classmates and teachers. The Columbine High School Massacre became one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. Among the many tragic moments that day, one stands out for its raw, unfiltered glimpse into the horror unfolding inside the school. The 911 call from the library.
How far are y'all away?
They're inside of the building, okay? You need to stay quiet, okay?
They're inside the building. You just need to stay quiet.
Patty Nielsen, a teacher, made the call while hiding with several students. The recording captures the chaos, fear, and brutality of that terrible day. The call begins with Patty Nielsen's calm but urgent voice as she tells the dispatcher, "I'm in the library. There are shots being fired." In the background, the sounds of gunshots, explosions, and panicked voices fill the air. Nielsen describes the situation, explaining that she and the students are hiding under desks and tables, hoping to avoid the shooter's attention. As the minutes tick by, the tension in Nielsen's voice grows. She whispers to the students, "Stay down. Be quiet." The dispatcher reassures her that help is on the way, but the reality is that the police are still trying to secure the perimeter and assess the situation. Inside the library, the students and teachers are on their own. At approximately 4 minutes into the call, the horror escalates. Harris and Klebold enter the library, and their voices can be heard in the background. They taunt and mock their victims, their laughter chilling and devoid of humanity. The gunshots become more frequent and louder as the killers begin their rampage through the library. Nielsen's voice quivers with fear as she tries to keep the students calm. "Shh, stay down, stay quiet," she whispers. But the terror is palpable. The killers' footsteps thud across the floor, and their voices grow closer. "Everyone with white hats, stand up. This is for all the shit you've given us for the past 4 years." One of them shouts, targeting specific students. The screams and cries of the students blend with the gunfire, creating a cacophony of horror. Nielsen can barely contain her panic as she continues to speak to the dispatcher. "They're in here. They're shooting. Oh my God," she says, her voice breaking. The dispatcher, trying to maintain composure, tells her to stay on the line and keep hidden. The killers move through the library with brutal efficiency. They shoot at students hiding under tables, showing no mercy. The sound of gunshots is relentless. "Do you believe in God?" one of the shooters asks a student before pulling the trigger. The cold-bloodedness of their actions is almost incomprehensible. For over 7 minutes, the library is a scene of sheer terror. The 911 call captures every horrifying moment. Nielsen's voice becomes a lifeline for the dispatcher, who listens helplessly as the massacre unfolds. "Please hurry," Nielsen begs. "We need help now." As the killers move on, the sounds of gunfire and screams slowly fade. Nielsen's voice, now almost inaudible, is filled with shock and disbelief. "I think they're leaving," she whispers. The dispatcher assures her that help is coming, but the damage has been done. 10 students and a teacher lie dead in the library, victims of a senseless act of violence. The aftermath of the Columbine Massacre left the community and the nation grappling with grief and anger. Patty Nielsen and the surviving students were left to cope with the trauma of what they had witnessed. The 911 call, released to the public, became a stark reminder of the fragility of safety and the devastating impact of gun violence. In the years that followed, Columbine High School would become synonymous with tragedy. The massacre prompted widespread changes in school safety protocols and ignited debates about gun control, mental health, and the influence of media on youth. For the survivors, the memories of that day would never fade, etched into their minds forever. The story of the Columbine 911 call is not just about a tragic event. It's a testament to the resilience of those who lived through it. Patty Nielsen's courage in the face of unimaginable fear and the bravery of the students who tried to protect each other stand as powerful reminders of humanity's capacity for strength even in the darkest of times. The Columbine 911 call remains one of the most disturbing and poignant recordings ever made. It captures not only the brutality of the shooters, but also the fear, confusion, and desperate hope of the victims. As we remember the events of that day, we honor the lives lost and the indomitable spirit of those who survived. It was an ordinary afternoon when young Nikki came home, expecting to find her brother, maybe watching TV or playing video games. But what she walked into was a scene of unimaginable horror that would haunt her forever. As she stepped into the house, a chilling silence greeted her. Nikki called out her brother's name, but there was no response. Her heart began to race, a sense of dread creeping in. Nikki walked through the house, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. She found her brother in his room, and her world shattered. He had taken his own life. The sight of her brother's lifeless body was too much for her young mind to process. Overcome with shock and terror, Nikki grabbed the phone and dialed 911, her hands trembling.
What's your name?
Mickey,
What do you mean by your brother's dead?
he killed himself
How did he do it?
with a gun.
Okay, are you home alone?
Well, I'm home alone with my sister.
Nikki's mind was racing, her thoughts a chaotic whirl of disbelief and sorrow. She kept repeating, "Why did you do it? Why did you leave me?" Her heartbreaking cries filled the silence, raw expression of her anguish and confusion. In between sobs, Nikki described her brother. He was just a teenager, full of potential and dreams, but something had driven him to this tragic end. The dispatcher, hearing the depth of Nikki's pain, tried to offer words of comfort. "I'm so sorry, Nikki. Help is on the way. Just stay with me, okay?" As they waited for the emergency responders to arrive, Nikki's emotions swung between anger, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of loss. "He was my best friend," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could he do this?" The dispatcher, feeling the intensity of Nikki's pain, encouraged her to keep talking, to let out her feelings. Nikki talked about the good times they had shared, the moments of laughter and joy. She remembered how her brother had always been there for her, protecting her from bullies, helping her with homework, making her laugh when she was sad. But now, in the face of his tragic death, those memories felt like sharp knives, cutting deep into her heart. The minutes felt like hours as they waited. Nikki clung to the phone, the dispatcher's voice her only connection to the outside world. She kept asking, "Why? Why did he leave me?" The dispatcher didn't have answers, but she listened, providing a steady presence in the midst of Nikki's storm of emotions. When the police and paramedics finally arrived, Nikki's home was filled with the sounds of footsteps, hushed voices, and the beeping of medical equipment. The officers gently took the phone from Nikki, assuring her that she wasn't alone anymore. But Nikki knew that, in a very real sense, she would always feel alone from now on. The responders confirmed what Nikki already knew. Her brother was gone. They treated her with kindness and compassion, understanding the immense trauma she had just endured. One of the paramedics stayed with her, talking softly, trying to soothe her frayed nerves. As the reality of her brother's death settled in, Nikki's shock gave way to an all-consuming grief. She cried until she had no tears left, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. The officers and paramedics gave her the space to grieve, standing by to offer support and comfort. In the days that followed, Nikki's life became a blur of sorrow and confusion. She struggled to understand why her brother had taken his own life, why he hadn't reached out for help. The memories of finding him, of making that desperate 911 call, haunted her every moment. The community rallied around Nikki and her family, offering their condolences and support. Counselors were brought in to help her cope with the trauma, to guide her through the dark days ahead. But the pain of losing her brother, of hearing her own anguished cries on that 911 call, was a wound that would take a long time to heal. The heartbreaking 911 call of Nikki is a stark reminder of the devastating impact of suicide on those left behind. It underscores the importance of mental health awareness and the need for compassionate support for those in crisis. Nikki's story, filled with sorrow and loss, also speaks to the strength and resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable tragedy. It was early in the morning on August 24, 2019, when 47-year-old Deborah Stevens began her routine job of delivering newspapers in Fort Smith, Arkansas. The sky was still dark as she navigated through the streets, unaware that the calmness of the morning would soon turn into a nightmare. Heavy rains had caused flash flooding in the area, creating a deadly trap for anyone caught unaware. As Deborah drove down Kincaid Avenue, the rising floodwaters caught her by surprise. In an instant, her SUV was swept off the road and into a grove of trees. The water quickly rose around her vehicle, trapping her inside. Panic set in as she realized the severity of her situation. With no way to escape and the water continuing to rise, Deborah did the only thing she could think of. She called 911.
A lot of people have called in on you, so I don't think that nobody's just sitting there. They actually called in, but they're not going to get themselves in danger because you put yourself in danger.
I'm scared. I've never had anything like this happen to me before.
Well, this will teach you next time. Don't drive in the water.
Couldn't see it, ma'am. I'm sorry, or I wouldn't have.
I don't see how you didn't see it. You had to go right over it, so...
The water is up to my windows. It's coming in. I'm going to drown, she pleaded. But instead of offering comfort, Donna seemed irritated. Miss Debbie, you're going to need to shut up. I need you to listen to me and calm down. Deborah's fear grew as the water continued to rise. I can't swim. I don't know how to swim, she exclaimed, her voice cracking with terror. The dispatcher, still maintaining her detached demeanor, asked for Deborah's location. But the chaotic circumstances made it difficult for Deborah to provide precise details. I'm by some apartments on Kincaid, but I don't know the exact address, she said. Minutes passed, feeling like hours to Deborah. She could hear the water sloshing around her, creeping higher and higher. I don't want to die, please, I don't want to die, she sobbed. Donna, growing increasingly impatient, responded, You're not going to die. Just hold on. The words offered little solace to Deborah, who was now in a full-blown panic. Deborah's phone began to malfunction as water seeped into the vehicle. My phone is going to die. The water is getting higher. Please hurry, she cried out. The dispatcher's responses remained cold and dismissive. This will teach you next time. Don't drive in the water, she scolded, as if Deborah's predicament was a result of mere recklessness rather than a tragic accident. As Deborah's situation grew more dire, she turned to prayer. Dear Father, please help me. Please send someone to save me, she whispered through her tears. Donna, still on the line, did not join in the prayer but continued to instruct Deborah to stay calm. I'm sending help, just stay on the line, she repeated. The floodwaters showed no mercy. They surged higher, filling the SUV. Deborah's cries for help became more frantic, more desperate. She could hear the sound of rushing water and the distant voices of onlookers who were unable or unwilling to help. People are just watching me. They're not doing anything, she said, her voice filled with despair. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the first responders arrived at the scene. But by then, it was too late. Deborah had been trapped in her vehicle for over an hour, and the floodwaters had claimed her life. The rescuers pulled her lifeless body from the SUV and attempted CPR, but their efforts were in vain. The aftermath of Deborah Stevens' tragic death sent shockwaves through the community. The 911 call recording, once released, sparked outrage and heartbreak. People were appalled by the dispatcher's lack of empathy and the failure to act with the urgency that the situation demanded. Deborah's family was left to grapple with the pain of losing a beloved wife, mother, and community member in such a horrific was deemed unprofessional. It was concluded that she had not committed any criminal offense. Nevertheless, the incident highlighted severe shortcomings in the emergency response system, prompting calls for better training and protocols for dispatchers. Deborah Stevens' story is a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the critical importance of compassion and urgency in times of crisis. Her final moments, captured in that distressing 911 call, serve as a haunting testament to the human cost of negligence and the desperate need for reform in emergency response practices. As we remember Deborah, We honor her life by striving to ensure that no one else suffers such a tragic and preventable fate. Scared yet? Thanks for watching the video, guys. Please hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you on the other video.